Hello everyone, my name is Arthur. I'm a PhD student from Université Paris-Saclay, and I made this presentation to describe you a little bit of my PhD project entitled Carbon and Nutrient Balances as Affected by Soil Erosion in Europe. This presentation will begin with a quick background of my academic and professional experience. Then I will add some context to my project. Then describe the problem I have been working and the challenges that I expect to face during the research. And I will end by telling you the results I expect to have by the end of my PhD. So first, some background. I'm an environmental engineer from Universidade de São Paulo in Brazil. I have a master's degree from the same institution, and in my undergraduate studies, in my master's studies too, I worked in the interface between science and policy, especially for agriculture. So I have been working with sustainable agriculture and land management in general. And because of this work, I joined in 2017 the Group of Public Policies, which is a group at the university that supports decision-making at the federal level in Brazil. So we created models, we run simulations, created tools sometimes, and generated data and information for the creation of laws, for the support of practical actions, and other decisions that have to be taken by the government. And in 2021, I started my PhD at Université Paris-Saclay, and it somehow relates to what I have been doing because it is a collaborative doctoral partnership between the LSE and the JRC, the Joint Research Center from the European Commission. And in my project, I expect to make a link between the theoretical work of the LSE and the practical work of the JRC. So there is some other institutions involved, as you can see here in the slide. My work is formally supervised by Philippe Martin from Agro-Paritech and Panos Panagos from the JRC, but there are also other researchers that are working on this project. I include here Victoria Naipal and Bertrand René, Marco Carozzi, Emmanuel Lugato, and Philippe Sier. And to add some context, I cite here the European Green Deal. It is a plan wrote in 2019 that expects to achieve zero net greenhouse gases emissions by 2050. And by doing so, Europe expects to become the first climate-neutral continent in the world. So this plan has actions for all the sectors of economy, including agriculture, and despite being a plan for 2050, it has strategies for 2030 already. One larger strategy is this one biodiversity strategy, that covers smaller ones, such as the Farm to Fork and the European Climate Law. And each of these smaller strategies have a lot of actions for land management in general. So, for example, one of these actions is to turn 30% of Europe into protected areas. And as acknowledged here in the publication by Luca Montanarella and Panos Panagos, soils are very important for the European Green Deal. As they say, soil play a key role achieving the ambitious target of a climate-neutral Europe by 2050. And also, soils are the foundation of agriculture and important in the Farm to Fork strategy. If we look here to the global carbon cycle published by CE et al. In 2013, we see that soils are also very important here because they store more carbon than the atmosphere and the surface of the ocean together, for example, and even if you don't consider permafrost in this calculation. And when we look closer to this figure, to the caption, we see that the fluxes from the export of carbon from soils to river and from rivers to the ocean are all assumed to be pre-industrial fluxes, which means that during the whole period of simulations they are held constant. And also the caption says that some recent studies indicate that this assumption is likely not verified. What this means is that In general, climate models are really good in representing the vertical fluxes of carbon, which are those in black and red here, as you can see in the figure, but not very good in representing the lateral fluxes from soils to rivers, for example by erosion and sediment transport and deposition. So this is something that needs to be improved in these models. And if we compare the behavior of these models in relation to observations, we can see that in general many models are really good, especially the IPSL here in the middle, are really good in representing the same fractions of carbon and distributed in different regions. But the fact that we still do not represent the lateral fluxes of carbon in the models may be telling us that we are giving the right answer for the wrong reasons. So this is another motivation to include these lateral fluxes, because maybe the omission of these fluxes are masking other biases in the model. And to describe my PhD problem, basically is to combine the recent advances in soil erosion modeling with actual policy question and future environmental changes. So I will look not only for carbon, but other nutrients as well, such as phosphorus, nitrogen, and maybe others that is still open. And by posing the problem, it is already possible to see an intrinsic challenge, which is to couple process-based models, which are theoretical, with data, that is empirical information for decision making. And there's a trade-off there, because the more complex and realistic we want our models to be, the more computing power we demand to perform these calculations. And I consider, for example, the spatial resolution, because in some cases climate models have a single cell for a region that may have 100 farms, for example. But if we go on the field, we see that in a single farm, land management decisions may impact how erosion happens, for example. So there is this difference in the scales, which is also the same problem that we have for land management. For example, we cannot assume for a single large portion of land that everything is the same, because there are too many details, too many differences. There is already a lot of ongoing work at the JRC to represent these differences and these details in their models. And during my PhD, during my time spent in ISPRA, I expect to incorporate all these works into my research. I forgot to tell you, but during my PhD, because of the CDP program, I am expected to be half of the time here at LSE and half of the time in ISPRA in Italy at the JRC. So it will be an opportunity to incorporate all this ongoing work. And because of all these characteristics, my PhD relates to Sea Land Challenge number 3, understanding and managing the transition towards an integrated land management. My study area is the whole European continent, and the scientific basis for my project is the CDYNAM model developed by Victoria Naipal in 2016, 2018, and 2020. As you can see here in the screen, it is a spatially explicit process-based carbon erosion scheme for use in Earth system models. So the CDYNAM adopts the same structure for carbon pools as century-like models, such as Orchidea from the LSE or Descent. And the major novelty of CDYNAM is the adoption of a routing scheme, shown here in the right, for the transport of nutrients in the landscape. So these lateral movements are based on the terrain, and it simulates the transport and the deposition of carbon. If we imagine here in this figure, for example, that this bottom left cell is the top of a hill, then in the simulations of CDYNAM, erosion happens here, and when there's precipitation, the sediment flows following this red arrow go into this middle cell, which is lower than the top of the hill. So the same is replicated for all the cells, and by doing so, the Cdyname provides an alternative to model these lateral movements. The current characteristics of Cdyname are that it is currently written to work with Orchid from the LSCE. It models carbon only, and it's calibrated for the Rhine Basin only too. And it has a relatively coarse resolution. So during my PhD, I'm expected to improve all of these characteristics. For example, as I told you, I'm expected to couple DayCent from the JRC here, because they already have high resolution information. They use 1 kilometer for the whole Europe, and they have many land management options. And by doing so, we will be able to create more realistic scenarios. And also, I will extend Cdyname to work not only with carbon, but also other nutrients, such as nitrogen and phosphorus. And not only for the Rhine Basin, but for the whole Europe. Right now, I'm currently in the first year of my PhD. I started in March. But we already have defined the research plan, and it contains the results that I expect to achieve in each year of my project. It is a 3-year project, as you can see here. And during my first year, I'm expected to calibrate Cdyname for other large river catchments in Europe. And to do that, I will work in the model calibration and scalability, because currently it takes too much time to run for small catchments, and we want to run for the whole Europe, so some improvements are necessary. And by doing so, we will be able to quantify the carbon sink or source by erosion. There is still an open debate about that I expect to contribute to with these results. Then in the second year, I will calculate the distribution of nitrogen and phosphorus by erosion, deposition and transport. And to do that, I will have to couple DayCent, because it has the explicit representation of nitrogen and phosphorus, and also to extend the Cdyname to emulate all these cycles too. And then I'll have to work again on the calibration and run it for the whole Europe to evaluate the historical impacts on nitrogen and phosphorus. So in this first 2 steps of my research, I will be looking at the past and a little bit to the present. But in the third part of my research, I'm expected to look at the future. So I will estimate losses of carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus by erosion under future climate change and management scenarios. So in this part, I will create scenarios to simulate actual real-world problems, to evaluate the impact of real-world targets. So here, we'll use all the tools created during the first 2 years of my PhD to evaluate how different strategies can lead to different impacts in the distribution of these nutrients in the landscape. So, as I told you in the beginning of the presentation, these scenarios may incorporate, for example, the goals of the European Green Deal in its formulation. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Here in the right, you can see the references in case you need more information about the data presented. Bye bye.